Kyle coming in. You got about 7-8 minutes with us.
Oh, big camera.
Have some fun. You got Mat Groom here.
Right.
You got about 7-8 minutes. Have fun. And
Hey guys, how you
doing,
doing?
Matt?
Very well, thank you.
I'm Dave from back here.
we got one more round table over here.
Hey Matt, we got some audio recordings being done here, so would you mind introducing yourself,
Yes.
your title, and any projects you recently worked on?
Absolutely. My name is Mat Groom. I'm a comic writer. I obviously worked very recently with Bear on the Singularity, which was his first ever graphic novel to go along with his first ever album original music, which is a very exciting project. I also work for Marvel Comics, DC Comics, Image Comics as well. I have my own creator own series, Inferno Girl Red. Currently doing Avengers X Ultraman for Marvel. Got a What If Galactus thing coming up for Marvel. And yeah, some other things in the works that I can't talk about.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's everything.
Awesome. All right, shall I jump in?
Yeah.
So in the story, we see the main character living a different life along with each song in the album.
Yes.
Right, which is a very cool idea. How did you come up with this idea? And were there other concepts that you explored before you settled on that one?
That idea was pretty early in the process. I think because we had the album is so vast, right? Like it hits so many different tonal feelings and ideas. We wanted to create a structure for a story that could let us visit all of those worlds and sort of experience all those emotions. And the idea of a guy who kept having the same, or having a different life over and over in different universes came very early in that. And then cracking the emotional core of that was sort of the second big part of that. Yeah, it was very early in the process. And I think it was something that as soon as we realized we could do that and then have that be a vehicle for us to bring in different artists on every chapter of the book and have artists sort of match the vibe of the track on the album, we knew we were onto something we really wanted to chase down.
Yeah, I think it worked really well. Did you have any other alternative approaches to it, or was that kind of the obvious?
That was kind of the first and only one, really. I think like the finer details of the story, a few things shifted around a little bit, but that was the core from the beginning, basically, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anyone?
In the end credits.
What was the most surprising thing once you started the project that
Romantic in the capital art.
I didn't expect this?
Most surprising thing. I mean, I think you can never predict what the art is going to come back like. And because we went to such a wide range of artists, like we specifically were looking for very different styles, and going to artists who we knew already had different styles of art and asking them to like push it, be like, show us something we've never seen before. This is a space to really go creative, to get away from the bounds of like traditional comics, go as far as you can, and then seeing artists respond to that, be like, yeah, absolutely, we can do that. Like, let's take the reins off and see what we can do. We definitely saw some surprising things in the art, but all good surprises, thankfully. But yeah, I think that and just the reception. I think the crossover between the comics reader audience and the album reader audience, like there's people who are big fans of Bear's music, obviously there's millions of them come in comics, and then a handful of people who are like into what we're doing in comics and are checking out the album and discovering Bear's original music that way has been really cool.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, about like merging the two communities and how they're discovering each other? Was sort of been some discoveries for yourself that you realized with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think because like it is in a lot of ways an independent project, right? Like Bear put this together himself, like it had an incredible range of people he could pull in, and we work with Image Comics, which is, you know, we all own stuff, it's all independent there. So we kind of have to hustle ourselves. So it is very much like trying to grassroots community build, and we're all trying to bring our own audiences to it. Yeah, and it's just been incredible seeing people that, you know, mostly fans of Bear's work because he's the name. But yeah, people that have been following my work for a little while, people who love what Kyle's doing in the publishing space, coming along, and it turns out there's a lot of overlap, right? Like I feel like people who love like Bear's Battlestar Galactica soundtrack and people who are into comics, that Venn diagram's basically a circle, you know, and if they're not already crossed over, they're going to want to once they know the way in. So just making sure we can build those paths for people, make it accessible and easy. And that's like one of the benefits of this being a graphic novel, right? Like there's no confusing this issue then that issue. It's one book, you pick it up, listen to the album on Spotify, and then you're golden. That's the whole experience.
So the music was done first, and then the writing was second. Is that kind of what was the sequence?
It was a little sort of in tandem. So Bear had done demo versions of most of the tracks on the album,
Yeah.
and I heard that very early on in the process. And the early stages of the story building process was just me lying on the floor in my lounge room with headphones on and just album over and over and over again. And then as the tracks developed, Bear would just send me updates to the album, and some of the tracks shifted around a little bit in the process, which meant the book shifted around a little bit, and I was sort of like chasing him that way. But yeah, it was just very much back and forth. Even like there was a little bit of the comic coming out to the album with some of the monologues in the book.
Right.
Bear read, loved. He's like, oh, we need to get these on the album, and then had people record those monologues, and they became the interstitial tracks from the album. So yeah, there was a bit of back and forth, but it was just about us over a year and a half, probably, constantly sharing our work back and forth and making sure that they sort of like find each other in the middle. It's a bit like sometimes they build bridges starting on each side, and then you just got to kind of find each other in the middle.
So did the writing influence the songs at any point, or was it always one way kind of?
I think not the songs to my knowledge. That might be a good question for me.
Yeah.
But definitely the monologue tracks sort of were the comics fighting their way into
Obviously,
it.
yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So you've worked with Bear in other projects that you've had, right?
No, this is my first time working with Bear. Like, I've known him a little bit. Kyle, the editor and creative director on the project, knows Bear very well. And I'm friends with Kyle, so I'd met Bear before, but this is our first time jamming on something professionally, which is very, very cool. I like being a fan of his work for so long, so it's like, yeah, dream come true to be doing this.
Do you see maybe another sequel to this? And who
What's
would
that?
you want involved?
Oh, I mean,
What's your wish list?
I definitely would love to do another one. I had such a blast on this one. This one's very self-contained though, and I'm so proud of it. Like, it might be the thing I'm most proud of that I've ever written. So I would not want to do another one unless I was confident that we could do it as well as this one. And I'm sure Bear would feel the same way about the album. But yeah, I'd love to do it. In terms of who would want on it, we went to a lot of our wish list for artists on this book was pretty much got everyone we were after, which was an amazing feeling. But there's certainly some collaborators that I've worked with recently that I'd love to get involved, like Erica, my co-creator on Inferno Girl Red. I'd love to get her on a chapter. Yeah, I think we got a lot of the people we're looking for in this book, which is how often you get to say that, right? I think that's one of the benefits of working with Bear. Like, everyone loves Bear's music. You say Bear McCreary and everyone's like, yeah, all right. I'll find the time. I'm very busy, but and because it's like often the chapters are quite small, right? Like, you'd say it's 3 or 4 pages. They're like, okay, I'll work after midnight a few nights a week, and we'll get this done because it's such a cool book. So, yeah, we're very lucky in that way.
I'm very curious about what I like to call the think tank. There's so much, obviously, with your credits and your knowledge, and Kyle and Bear. How do you all zero in on exactly what you wanted to do? Obviously, the collaboration and the interest, as you mentioned, is there, but obviously, at some point, you have to figure out exactly how you're going to set out this roadmap. How did you all narrow in all the experience involved?
It was one of the things I loved about this is Bear is a very generous collaborator. Like, he's obviously a tremendously successful person, but he has no ego or pretense about this stuff. So we would spend hours, because I'm in Australia usually, and he's in LA, so we'd be on Zoom at all sorts of weird hours, often like 4 a.m. for me or whatever, just like shooting the shit and trying to figure out like what we're trying to say with this thing, shaping like the bigger shape of it and the finer details, like the little lines, finding little ways for the album to come through in the comic in like little visual motifs or like lines that go from the lyrics to it. So yeah, it was just about us trying to find out, bouncing back and forth, what the heart of it was. And I think what we really cracked it, I think, when we got to realizing that it is about parenthood in a lot of ways. It's about knowing how hard life is and how intractably like difficult it is, and still deciding to bring life into that world. Like, that's an impossible decision, and there's no right answer, and everyone has to make their own decision about that. And it's about the universe making that decision for another universe, which makes it grand and cosmic, but it is also about one person making that decision for their child. So it's that, once we cracked that sort of macro, micro emotional arc of it, I think we found it. And everything else, we just kept pulling back to that. Like, is it serving that story? If so,
right in season 6, it's like oh, that's not going to work. Like,
Okay, I got a couple. So is there a deeper meaning behind the number of universes, like the 553 universes, or is that just kind of out of a hat?
No, honestly.
Okay, are there any other like references or Easter eggs in the story to other work, or is it all really...
No, I wanted to keep it really self-contained,
Yeah.
particularly because I knew that there would be a lot of people coming into this who perhaps had really read comics before.
Yeah.
Because they're a fan of Bear's music and they wanted to try it. So we wanted to keep it totally self-contained. There's a lot of small references to the tracks on the album, different visual motifs, like some that might be like pretty small and hard to find, but I like to keep those as like secret little hidden things for people to discover if they're really paying attention to the art, basically.
Yeah, I definitely noticed the reference to the music was there.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't like really in your face, but it was there if you look for it.
Yeah, it was really important too that both stood alone. If
right.
you only ever found the graphic novel and you'd never heard the album, you could read it and not be confused, right? And obviously the album stands alone perfectly all by itself, but finding the balance of, there is some integration, but they don't rely on each other was the sweet spot for us.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what was it like working on those but I had to know
I mean, yeah, incredible. With the musicians, that was mostly bad, but I spent a lot of time with them in my ears, you know, like, even so Type 3, the track that Rufus is on, was one of my favorites from the start, and Rufus wasn't on that originally. That was just Bear and his brother on the demo, and I fell in love with that song earlier, but then when Rufus got on the track, it really changed my perception of it. And it was one that's really fundamental in some ways to the shaping of the graphic novel, because it sort of defines the relationship between Blue Eyes and Yellow Eyes when they finally get to properly interact and know each other, and that sense of yearning between one and the other. And yeah, having Rufus, his vocals in my ears, kind of being that vocal inspiration for that, it did definitely change my feeling of the scene. So but yeah, with the music artist, it was more of a one-way thing. Like, I'd hear what they're putting down and then try my best to grab the soul of that and put it on the page and lay it out so the artist could then interpret that in their way and bring their own soul to it.
All right, so I wanted to ask, beyond the musical aspect and the writing aspect, is obviously the visual aspect.
Yeah.
What's been that collaboration for you? And we're truly living like in revolutionary times where everybody is taking projects and throwing them on all different mediums.
Absolutely.
Audiobooks are available.
Yep.
Obviously, we have theatrical productions, animation. Has there been discussions about what's next after this?
There might be more of a question for Bear. I don't know if there's anything specific in the works. We've talked broadly, I think, about all the possibilities of this, right? Like, it is inherently a multimedia project, and we felt like in some ways we're, blazing a bit of trail. People have done comic music tie-ins before, but this level of integration, it feels pretty new. And I feel like there's definitely room for more, And Bear, as I said before, he's such a generous collaborator and such a creative guy that I could see him taking the album into a lot of different forms. I think the artists that we watched in the comics probably sent us some inspiration for that, because they were so talented, and the beauty of the project is, like, I got to serve as a bit of a conduit between Bear and these artists, but then seeing what the artists brought to it, it's like I couldn't have imagined how incredible and how deeply beautiful it turned out. So, listen, I hope there's more of some form, because I can't get enough, right? Like, it's been such an incredible journey, and I want more.
Yeah.
Wouldn't say no to more.
Was there an ideal way you want fans to experience this? We hear the word concept a lot, which means it's new, it's refreshing, and it may not have a particular genre set to it.
Yes.
But when someone is reading a graphic novel and you obviously have the music there and you're mesmerized by the art, or you're stunned by the visuals, or the writing is intriguing you, how do you ideally want the fans to experience?
My dream is that people will sit down with the graphic novel in a quiet, beautiful, peaceful space, really good quality headphones on, and read the graphic novel along with the album. And what that means is you're going to have to slow down your reading experience, because there's a lot more album than there is time it takes to read the graphic novel. But if you're sitting there and you're kind of forced to wait till you move the chapter, that means you're sitting there, you're first forced to really look at the art, right? It's almost like a meditative experience. Like, you have to take in all of the details of this incredible art, and you can do that and then move on to the next chapter with the music. I feel like that's the way to do it. I understand it's a big ask, and my thing is, like, you do it whatever way you want to do it, right? Like, you live your life. art is for you to take in whatever way you want. But if I had it my way, that would be the way people would do it. Yeah.
It's funny, that kind of reminds me as a child, you know, when we have those projectors and it goes beep, and then you flip and it's playing.
Absolutely.
But in the best kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Experiencing it and you're like, wow, it's the visual and the audio together.
If there's something to be said for like being not forced, but encouraged to slow down and drink stuff in, you know. And I know it's hard these days, like me as much as anyone, everything's always moving, but that sort of meditative aspect to it really appeals to me.
Yeah, as horrendous as the pandemic was, it was a moment where everybody got to kind of slow down
100%.
and evaluate things. And the comic industry struggled, but it also still provided a lot of entertainment for us. The music was still available and entertainment and so on.
100%. And I feel like this project in some ways came of that. I think Bear's been working on it for a lot longer than that, but it gave us time to like really focus on it. We're all considering, right? And I think I know for Bear, and once I was brought on for me, this was a dream, like, you know, once in a lifetime project. And we knew we had to figure out how to make it work. And yeah, we got there. It feels great.
Well, I experienced it exactly like, you know, I did the headphone thing, and it was a great experience. It's really fun.
That means well to me. I'm glad to hear that.
And I'm actually not a big heavy metal guy, but I really like.
Right.
The music is very approachable.
100%.
I'm a heavy metal guy.
I mean, that's what I told, because I have like a lot of fans who aren't necessarily metal people, but I think it's very accessible.
Yeah, it's melodic. Right?
It is melodic, and there's a range of experiences, right? Like there is some really heavy stuff on the album, but there's some like also very like considerate, methodical stuff as well. Some like extremely melodic stuff. There's a whole range of experiences. So I feel like there's something for everyone in the album.
So Blue Eyes had to make a big decision at the end.
Yeah.
And he mostly considered his experience with his daughter. Did he think about his previous incarnations and the weight of their decisions weighing on his decision? You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
If he said no, then all of their lifetimes were for nothing. I don't know. Was that part of something you considered putting in the story?
I hope that that's kind of implicit, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's like if he's decided not to die and let the universe be reborn, that everything would have been for nothing, because everything ends, right? Like everything ends, and if we believe that if something ends it means nothing, that means nothing means anything. Like we have to make some peace with the fact that stuff is over, and that doesn't mean that it's not beautiful.
Yeah.
But I think in weighing up all of the pain and beauty of his existence, and realizing there's really no way to tally that, the conclusion he came to is, at very least, I have curiosity about what's next. And I think, in some ways, young people have more curiosity for what's next, and they've got to be allowed to chase down that curiosity, right? Like, even if you don't share that curiosity with them, they deserve that chance to chase that down.
Last question.
It's pretty hard to say no, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone else? Nope.
All
right. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, guys. That was a great question. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the project.
Oh, I really appreciate that.
done.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate that. Have a good day.
Kyle, wrap it up.
You were just like, yes, I want it.
Oh man, okay. Well, I think first of all, I've been a fan of Bear's music since, I was going to make him feel terrible, but since I was in high school, like, I was little.
We'll make sure to tell him you said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he'll kill me. Yeah, it was like, Battlestar Galactica, I think it was like early high school for me. Loved it. And, you know, have been following his work ever since. Kyle, I'm friends with, has known Bear for a while as well, so I got to meet him personally a little before this. So when he said he wanted to do a comic, and Kyle recommended me, I was like, absolutely. But then speaking with Bear about it, he's such a generous collaborator and was so open. Like the album and the tracks of the album obviously had very clear themes, but in terms of the structure of it, he was very open to, you know, whatever we wanted to do. So yeah, I was on board pretty much immediately. And then when we cracked this idea of different universes for each chapter of the book, meaning we could bring in different artists, that was the most exciting thing, because it meant we could bring in so many different talented artists and like people that I'm close to personally, the people I'd never met and have been fans of forever, and get them all to jam on it. It sort of made the comic match the album in that way, because the album has so many fantastic like guest people on it. Doing the same thing with the comic. I was like, yeah, that's gonna rock, and it did. I had a blast. So, yeah, it was great.
So this is an amazing project, companion project, and it has so much creativity jam-packed into it. There's so many places that you go with it. With so much freedom, in a sense, what do you think was the biggest hurdle that kind of got in the way? And sometimes, I think Ramón was just telling us, sometimes you need those tent poles to kind of guide you. But
Absolutely.
But in this case, I'm curious about that experience.
I think the boundless scope of the album in some ways created its own limitations because we knew we wanted to represent the entirety of the album, and it's so diverse. Like there's such different tones and emotions in it. Realizing that we wanted to hit all of those meant we're going to be jumping around a fair bit by nature, right? And it'd be moving quite fast. If we wanted to represent the whole album in terms of comic pages, it was going to be pretty brief. It would be like bang, 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 which in some ways have created the structure of the story. So those restrictions ended up forming the backbone of the story, and then it was up to us to sort of find the heart of it, because we arrived pretty early at this idea of someone being born into different universes and experiencing them, because that would allow us to sort of walk through all of the universes, but then figuring out the why of it, the heart of the story. And I think it was like Bear and I were on a Zoom. I was in Australia, so it was like 4 a.m. my time or something. I was so out of it, and we'd be going on for hours, but we arrived at this point of it really being a story about parenthood, about like living your entire life and weighing up all of the pain and the joy and the beauty of the experience, realizing you can't really put that on any sort of objective scale and figure it out, but you kind of have to do if you want to decide to bring life into it, right? Like that is an incredibly difficult and important decision. And how do you do that if you're a person? That's really difficult. How do you do that if you are the universe? You have to decide if life is to continue with all of the pain and beauty that comes with that. What's that process like? And it gave a book about like live that process, go on the journey and find out for yourself.
Speaking of pain, I want to story. What lessons did you work on such a great project?
That is an excellent question. I mean, I think what I really came to appreciate through writing the book was that loss is life, right? Like those things are intractable. And it's not a novel idea, but loss framing your life and teaching you what was important. Like you don't really appreciate what you had until it was gone, and you don't appreciate the most meaningful things until they're no longer available to you. And having one being experienced that over and over and over again, and having reinforced over and over again just how beautiful life can be and how hard it can be, like experiencing the most extreme version of that became the sort of core of the book. So yeah, I mean, it really is. I knew we were onto something when I sent the final script to our letterer, and she's like, "Oh, I couldn't finish lettering the book today. I was crying too much at the end." And I was like, "Yes, I did it. I'm an evil genius." Yeah, that I knew that we were handling the subject appropriately. That reaction from our sort of first audience.
So I had a question that I really hope does not sound like a gotcha, but I want to preface, no one else is really doing work like this, and I think it's so incredible. It is a multiverse story,
yes,
and that's very prevalent today.
Yeah,
and I'm
absolutely.
wondering, one, is there something in the water that's making us all so drawn to these stories?
Rufus Wainwright here. Everybody knows who that is?
It's sickened.
You came forward. We're going to shoot some still pictures right now for just a minute. So if you want to come over, come on over.
Okay, to recap. And what?
Multiple stories, something in the water.
Why do we think we're so drawn to those stories, and what makes the multiverse lens the perfect fit for this album and story?
Yeah, I think that people's conceptions of what a story can be have been really broadened recently, right? Like I feel like the ability for audiences to handle pretty complex ideas has expanded greatly, and the idea of a multiverse is a very useful construct for examining different variants of experiences. And I feel like in a lot of ways it came from comics, because comics inherently, you get to see worlds through the lens of the eyes of different artists every time, right? So in some ways you're experiencing a different version of the world every time you read a comic. and that became a very easy and frankly inexpensive way to do it in comics initially, right? Very hard to do in film, easy to do in comics. And then as that literacy built in the sort of audience community, that made its way to films, and I think in films they found how useful it could be. I think it can also be a bit of a cop-out in storytelling-wise, it can remove stakes, but if you handle it correctly, it can also be a very beautiful way of reflecting on existence. I think about like Everything Everywhere All at Once is very similar, like incredibly expansive, but it's about a very personal human story. And if you're using it for that human lens, I think it can be really beneficial. And that was our kind of guiding ethos in a lot of ways. It was like we want to make sure that as we're doing this, it is a story about one person and their very human experience, and the multiverse angle on it is just how we're exploring this idea in a way that kind of comics can only really do. Like it is that incredibly expansive canvas, and if we can do both of those things, then it will be worth using that concept, even if it is very popular at the moment.
What? Oh, no, you're good. See, what part of this process for you was just
surprisingly smooth? I think definitely working with Bear. Like, like I had met him in passing before, but I had never collaborated with him, right? And he's a very famous guy, and you never really know how this is going to go, right? And I'm not a famous guy, so. But Bear was always so generous and like it was, treated me as an equal, and we just gelled really, really well, which you can't take for granted. I've had other experiences that aren't necessarily just like that, so I was very grateful for it. That went very, very smoothly.
So what was the most challenging part of because multiverse stories, there's so much going on in there, there's so much to tie together. So what was the most challenging aspect of making sure that everything was cohesive in the end and made sense?
Definitely, and thankfully this is what Kyle's job than my job, managing the artists. Everyone is incredible, and fantastic to work with, but getting 18 people to find a cohesive vision, and although they're all expressing themselves in different ways, we needed to have, we open each chapter with the same framing panels to sort of orientate people, so making sure that there was this consistency across the book so it didn't feel incoherent, it just felt expansive. That was difficult. And then the schedules of 18 different people. Some of them are incredibly busy and did it because they're Bear McCreary, I'll do it at midnight after I finish my day job. Which is great, and we're very appreciative for it, but it meant there was a lot of emails, a lot of calendars, a lot of freaking out about let's get it on time. We did it! Yay!
So I asked Kyle, I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
What are you most excited for about this project for the masses to experience?
I mean, for me personally, probably just experiencing the different artists, because there are some big heavy hitters on there, and then there are some people that are pretty relatively new, and having that be a vehicle, bringing all of Bear's fans, hopefully introducing some people to comics at all, which would be great, and we wanted to make it accessible in that way, but then introducing them to all of these incredible artists, and if people find artists they're huge fans of, and then that builds their careers and their community, then that's really exciting. So I hope that people find their way to new artists and find some new favorites as part of this big journey that we're on.
Are there, because this is a big multimedia enterprise, are there other multimedia projects that you sort of look to be not by inspiration, but just sort of to see how that was approached?
Yeah, not really, weirdly. Maybe we should have. I think there was no one who had really done quite, as far as I know, what we were trying to do in terms of tying the comic and the album together so closely. So really, rather than look out, we just made sure that we were in close collaboration connection with each other constantly. I heard the album very early on in its conception. Bear was involved in every stage of the process, and it was just about us coming back to each other constantly. And I describe it as how something they build bridges on each side and kind of meet in the middle. We did that. and then we got to the middle, like, oh, thank God, it fits. Let's go together. And it only fit because we kept checking back with each other and making sure that they kept integrating back together. And I think if you didn't do that, if Bear wasn't such a generous and consistent collaborator, it very well could have been a disaster. And I'm glad it wasn't. I'm glad it ended up where we ended up.
We'd heard earlier that not only did the album influence the graphic novel, of course, but it also went the other way around and kind of all built on each other. Can you tell us a bit about that process and the decisions that were made to make that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was a surprising part for me because I expected it to be more one way, and it definitely, for the most part, it was, right? The album, as much as it was unfinished, did come first, and we were kind of responding to that, but Bear was so involved in the process and was clearly energized by it that some of it did find its way in. I think the most direct way is there are some monologues in the book that Bear responded to and felt evoked the themes of the album so well that he wanted to have them on the album. So he took them to friends of his, like Lee Pace and Denai Guerrera, and said, hey, could you record these and we'll put them on the album? And then he wrote music to go to those monologues. And yeah, that meant that stuff that I had written was performed by Denai Guerrera with music by Bear McCreary, and I think I still really process that. I think in a couple of years I'll sit upright in bed like, whoa, hang on, did that happen? Yeah, it was incredible, and I feel incredibly privileged and fortunate. And then I think in some small ways, Bear was seeing art come in as he was finishing the album, and I'm sure in some way that influenced the tone of the music, but to what extent, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So given that this was a unique experience,
yes.
With the multi-media story, can you tell us a little bit more about how your project as a writer?
Yeah.
Because it was so different.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing was making sure that I saw myself as very much a conduit between Bear and the album and the artists. So I wanted to give people structure and a thematic cohesion, but also make sure I was giving space for the artists to express themselves and bring their soul to it as much as Bear brought his to the album. And I think a lot of that is just explaining to the artists what the core pillars were that were sort of immovable, but also where there was flexibility. And there was a lot of flexibility. So I would often, in writing the scripts, you'd normally lay out panel 1, panel 2, panel 3. I would do that, but explain this is one way the story could go, but you understand it. We know that you understand this chunk of the story. You express it in the way that you want to, and we'll rewrite the script. I'll rewrite the dialogue to your art if necessary to make sure that you are communicating it through your lens, because we came to you for your style. Even going to them as artists and saying this is a very expensive creative project. Take the wheels off. Just go out there as far as you can. There's no style to read. We want it specifically to be the most creative thing you've ever done. And they lived up to that. They came back yeah, absolutely. I've been waiting for that chance to sort of take the limiters off and go crazy. And so they did.
Since there are so many eras that this story hops through.
Yeah.
To cover every track, and because it's on a multiversal scale, were there any arcs or pieces of the story that just felt like the biggest hurdle, or felt like the part that just couldn't quite fit until the very end?
Yeah, I think there were some challenges we knew going in that we weren't going to be able to cover each track of the album in the same amount of detail, just because of the amount of space that we had. So figuring out what were core pillars versus what were moments that we would pass through and kind of experience those emotions in almost like a roller coaster way, you hit it and then you're out again, straight into the next world. And the album did shift around a little bit in its later stages, between the story shifted around a little bit, which was some mechanical work for me, sort of restructuring things a little bit. So that was a little difficult, but there again, Bear was so open about everything, and I knew decisions pretty far ahead of time that were coming down the pipe, so that was difficult, but good. I think that was probably one of the bigger challenges, and then that cohesiveness as well, I think, was finding out how to communicate that cohesiveness and where to do it without imposing problematic limitations of the creativity of our artist partners. I'm pretty happy that we with the balance solution.
But ultimately, it's nothing compared to balancing 18 calendars.
That part, yes. That's why Kyle does his job and I do my job. I would be really mad at that.
I can only balance 4, barely.
Yeah, 100%. Like, he's got that director brain. Like, he's very good at coordinating a million different people with different skill sets. And I'm very thankful for him.
So you mentioned that you had to sometimes make adjustments for like artists and like with the script. Were there a lot of those, or did it somehow just kind of like all fall in together? Like
it was surprisingly cohesive, and I think because we were very clear about that freedom up front, we didn't need to push anyone to be like, oh, to go harder.
Kind of had like an open escape of what people did.
100%. People like came back with their visions, and then we were able to chase that and make sure that we were, really like fitting the story around their creativity and politics. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
So much.
Great.
Pulling in, you're either going to get Bear